Today, we're going to get into the mind of T.S. Eliot, an American poet who packed his bags for Britain and somehow ended up writing the definitive soundtrack for 20th century anxiety. He wasn't just writing poems, he was giving a voice to an entire generation that felt completely adrift in a world torn apart by war.
You've probably heard this line before, right? April is the cruelest month. But this isn't about some unseasonably cold spring weather. No, this is a punch to the gut. It's the first sign that you're entering a world of deep disillusionment, a world that Eliot is about to map out with brutal honesty.
All right, so here's our game plan. First up, we'll look at how he became the go-to poet for modern anxiety. Then, we're going to dissect his absolute masterpiece, The Wasteland. From there, we'll track his incredible spiritual journey, check out his other gigs as a critic and playwright, and finally, try to figure out why his work still hits so hard today.
Okay, let's get right into it. Because to really understand Eliot, you have to understand the chaotic, shell-shocked world that forged his early poetry.
So Eliot becomes this leading figure in a movement called Modernism. And look, this wasn't just some artsy trend, it was a full-blown reaction to the trauma of World War I. Think about it, a world where all the old rules about progress, God, and civilization had just been obliterated. Modernism was the art that grew out of those ruins.
His early stuff, especially the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, was just different. He used this technique called stream of consciousness, which is basically like he hit record on a person's inner monologue. You get all the rambling, the self-doubt, the fragments. It was the perfect way to show how paralyzed and anxious people felt living in these new, overwhelming cities.
All this early experimentation, it was all leading somewhere. He was gearing up for something absolutely monumental, a poem that wasn't just going to define his career but would pretty much change literature forever, The Wasteland.
So, picture it. The year is 1922. Eliot drops this 433-line poem on the world, and it's an earthquake. It instantly becomes the text for modernism, a kind of poetic monument to a broken time.
So how do you even begin to read this thing? Well, it's broken up into 5 parts. The best way to think about it is like 5 different camera angles, all pointed at the same spiritually dead world. Each section gives you a new, unsettling view of the decay.
And to build this world, Eliot literally throws everything into the mix. You've got different languages, voices from every social class, bits of ancient myths, lines from Shakespeare, even references to Hindu scriptures. It's not a story, it's a collage, a fractured, chaotic collage that perfectly reflects the fractured, chaotic culture he saw all around him.
You know, after painting such a profoundly bleak picture in The Wasteland, you have to wonder, where do you go from there? For Eliot, the answer was pretty shocking. He'd spent years diagnosing the sickness of the modern world, and now he was going to spend the rest of his life looking for a cure.
And this timeline just lays it all out. You see that pivotal year, 1927? That's when he converts to Anglicanism. And this wasn't just some small personal decision. It was a seismic shift that completely rewired his entire artistic and intellectual project. He was moving from despair towards a search for faith.
I mean, the contrast between his early and late work is just night and day. All that focus on spiritual emptiness and cultural decay, it gets replaced by these incredibly deep, searching meditations on faith, time, and the possibility of redemption. It's a total 180. And you can feel this change right away in poems like Ash Wednesday. But the journey really culminates in his last great work, 4 Quartets. It's a dense, gorgeous, and deeply philosophical piece that a lot of people argue is his true masterpiece, even more so than The Wasteland.
But here's the thing. If you only know T.S. Eliot, the poet, you're really only getting half the story. The man was an absolute giant in drama and literary criticism too. And we're not talking about a side hobby here. He became a hugely successful playwright and, you could easily argue, the single most influential literary critic of the entire 20th century. His ideas didn't just describe literature, they actively shaped it. He didn't just comment on the game, he changed the rules. As a playwright, he brought poetry back into the theater with plays like Murder in the Cathedral. And, as a critic, his essay Tradition and the Individual Talent basically told poets, hey, it's not all about you. He argued that to be a truly great artist, you had to be in conversation with the entire history of literature, from Homer all the way up to the present. For the time, this was revolutionary.
One of his most famous critical concepts was something called the objective correlative. Now, it sounds super academic, I know, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It's the ultimate show, don't tell.
Instead of saying a character is sad, you give the reader a concrete image, like a patient etherized upon a table, that creates the feeling of sadness in them directly. It's about making the reader feel the emotion, not just hear about it.
So, all of this brings us to the big question, right? Why are we still talking about this guy? Why does T.S. Eliot still matter so much in our own crazy, anxious world? Well, for starters, the rest of the world certainly thought he mattered. In 1948, his incredible influence gets the ultimate stamp of approval when he's awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature.
When you boil it all down, Eliot's legacy is huge, and it's a two-parter. On one side, he completely reinvented what poetry could sound like and what it could talk about. But on the other, as a critic, he fundamentally changed how we even think and talk about literature itself. He really did change the rules of the game.
And if you need one quote to capture his deep fear of where modern society was heading, it's gotta be this one from his poem, The Hollow Men. For Eliot, the apocalypse wasn't going to be some big, dramatic explosion. No, it would be a quiet, pathetic fizzle, a slow, empty decay.
And that's the thought I really want to leave you with. In our own age of digital echo chambers, constant distraction, and all these low-level, humming anxieties, doesn't that vision of an end that comes not with a bang but a whimper feel unsettlingly and maybe more relevantly true?